Evan wiped his hands on a rag, the smell of motor oil clinging to his fingers as he leaned against the counter. The small repair shop was quiet, except for the low hum of a fluorescent light flickering overhead and the occasional clink of metal from the garage. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. It's the kind that paid bills and kept a roof over his head and food on the table for his daughter. He glanced at the clock. Almost 9. He had to pick her up from school in a couple of hours, and then homework and dinner would follow. Another ordinary day, another ordinary struggle. But he had learned to take it all in stride. The door jingled, and a well-dressed woman walked in. Her heels clicked sharply on the concrete floor, echoing against the walls lined with car parts and tools. She carried herself with confidence, the kind that came from a life where everything seemed to come easy, where every problem had someone else to solve it. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the messy shop, the oil stains on the floor, and then landing on Evan. Her expression tightened as if she had stepped into the wrong place, or maybe she already knew she didn't belong there. Evan noticed the subtle judgment in her eyes, but he didn't flinch. He had grown used to it. People often assumed things about him before they even spoke, seeing the grease on his clothes or the roughness of his hands, and deciding his worth in an instant. She cleared her throat. "Hi, I need my car looked at. It's making a strange noise." Her voice was clipped, but polite enough. Like she was used to giving commands and having them followed. Evan nodded and offered a small smile. "Sure, I can take a look. Can you tell me what kind of noise it's making?" As she spoke, he listened carefully, taking in every word. He had a knack for noticing things others missed, the way engines sounded when something was slightly off, the faintest squeak that could become a bigger problem if ignored. While she talked, he silently prepared for the work ahead. Already thinking about what tools he would need, she raised an eyebrow at him, taking in his worn-out clothes, the oil stains, and the faded tattoo peeking from under his sleeve. It was a small, intricate design that spoke of a past life, something she couldn't possibly understand just by looking. Her lips pressed into a thin line, a flicker of judgment passing over her face. She didn't say anything about it, but Evan noticed. He always noticed. "Do you work here alone?" she asked, trying to maintain a polite tone, but unable to hide the underlying doubt. "I do," he replied. "Been running this shop for a few years now." "You're the first customer this morning," she nodded slowly, glancing around the shop again. "It's cozy," she said, the word hesitant, almost reluctant to acknowledge that it might have a charm of its own. She moved closer to the counter, her hand brushing against a stack of papers. "How long will it take to check?" Evan shrugged. "Depends on what the problem is. Could be a quick fix, could take a few hours." He gestured toward a chair. "You can wait over there if you like." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the chair. She was not used to waiting, not used to uncertainty. She nodded and sat down, crossing her legs and checking her watch. Evan returned to the garage, rolling up his sleeves, the tattoo fully hidden beneath his long shirt. His hands were steady as he inspected the car, listening closely to the sound she had described. As he worked, he thought about his daughter, about the life he was trying to build for her. He remembered dropping her off at school that morning, her small hand slipping into his as he held it gently. She had asked about the noise in her backpack, the scribbles she had drawn. The small things that filled a father's heart with pride and worry at the same time. He smiled faintly to himself, a warmth spreading through him that nothing else could replace. This was why he worked so hard, why he endured the long hours and the constant judgment of strangers who didn't understand. The woman watched him from the counter. Slightly. She couldn't help it. The quiet competence, the calmness in his movements. It was unnerving. She had assumed he was slow, unskilled, just another mechanic who had fallen into this life by accident. But the way he moved, the precision in his hands, the way he seemed to anticipate every tool he would need, was clear he knew exactly what he was doing. Evan didn't look up as she spoke again. "So, have you been doing this long?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled skepticism. "Long enough," he said simply, tightening a bolt and listening to the engine hum. "Long enough to know when something isn't right." She pursed her lips, a hint of surprise crossing her features. "And your daughter? You raise her alone?" Evan paused for a moment, considering how much to reveal. "Yeah," he said finally. "It's just the two of us. She's the best part of my life." She looked at him then, really looked, and for a brief moment, she saw something beyond the oil stains in the tired eyes. She saw the care, the love, the patience that he carried silently. But before she could dwell on it, her mind pulled back to the surface again. She had her own life, her own judgments, her own world where appearances mattered. Evan finished inspecting the engine and wiped his hands on the rag again. "I think I know what's causing the noise," he said, finally looking up at her. "Shouldn't take long to fix." She nodded a little reluctantly. "Good. I appreciate it." As he got to work, she couldn't help but watch him, her curiosity battling with her assumptions. He moved with a quiet confidence, speaking softly when needed, never raising his voice, never demanding respect. He earned it through action, not words. The tattoo peaked again as he reached for a wrench. But she quickly looked away, uncertain if she wanted to see more. Hours passed in a rhythm of careful work and quiet observation. The shop smelled of oil and rubber, the sunlight streaming through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Evan's focus never wavered. Each movement, each adjustment, was precise and intentional. The kind of skill that only comes from years of dedication. Finally, he stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "All done," he said simply. "Shouldn't hear the noise again." She got up, looking closely at the car, turning the key in the ignition. The engine purred smoothly, no hint of the previous problem. She couldn't hide the impressed look on her face. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer than before. I didn't expect it to be fixed so quickly." Evan nodded, offering a small smile. "Glad I could help." As she paid and left, she gave him one last look, fleeting and complicated, as if she sensed there was more to him than met the eye. Evan watched her go, then returned to his tools, the quiet of the shop embracing him again. He thought about his daughter waiting for him, about homework and dinner and bedtime stories. Life was simple, but it was real, and it was full. And sometimes the most important stories were hidden beneath the surface. In the quiet moments that no one else took the time to notice. After the woman left, Evan took a deep breath and looked around the small shop. The morning light had shifted, casting long stripes of sunlight across the concrete floor. The engine hum had gone quiet, leaving only the distant sound of cars passing by on the street outside. He leaned against the counter for a moment, letting the silence fill the space. It was a rare moment to pause and think, but he knew he couldn't linger too long. Soon, it would be time to pick up his daughter from school. He glanced at the small stack of invoices on the counter, some unpaid, some half-completed. Every day was a balancing act, trying to keep everything in order while also being there for his daughter. She was the heart of his life, and he would do anything to make sure she had a sense of stability, even if it meant working long hours and carrying exhaustion home with him. The thought of her smiling face, her little voice calling him Dad as she ran into his arms, gave him strength that nothing else could. By mid-morning, he had finished cleaning up the tools and putting everything back in its place. He washed his hands and went outside, the cool air hitting his face as he locked the shop. He walked down the street, keys in his pocket, thinking about the simple routines that made up his life. Grocery shopping, school runs, bedtime stories, mundane for some, but to him, they were precious. Each small responsibility was a chance to show his daughter love and care, to give her a life that was steady and safe. As he walked to the school, he noticed the other parents chatting, carrying coffee cups, or rushing to work. He kept his gaze ahead, not stopping for long conversations. His daughter was his priority, not social appearances or idle chatter. When he reached the school gate, he saw her waiting. Her backpack slightly crooked on her small shoulders, but her face lighting up when she spotted him. He knelt down, opening his arms. "Hi, Dad," she shouted, running toward him. "Hey, kiddo," he said, catching her and spinning her around in a quick hug. She giggled, wrapping her arms around his neck. He could feel her little heart beating fast with excitement and relief to see him. It was the kind of joy that made every struggle worthwhile. They walked home together, her chatter filling the quiet streets. She talked about her day, her friends, her lessons, and little things that had happened at school. Evan listened, really listened, asking questions and encouraging her to share more. He never wanted to miss a single detail, knowing that these moments would pass quickly as she grew older. Once home, he helped her with homework at the small kitchen table. Their apartment wasn't fancy, just enough space for them to live comfortably. Books stacked on shelves, drawings taped to the walls, and a few family photos made it feel warm and lived in. He checked her math problems, nodded at her spelling exercises, and praised her for her drawings. She beamed with pride, and he felt a deep satisfaction that no amount of money could buy. After homework, it was time for dinner. Evan cooked a simple meal, careful to make it something both filling and healthy. They ate together, talking about their plans for the weekend or little things they wanted to do. Sometimes it was a trip to the park, sometimes it was just watching a movie together. He knew that stability was not about luxury, but about love, presence, and the ability to make each day meaningful. After dinner, he cleaned up while she packed her school bag for the next day. They had a bedtime routine that was strict but gentle. He read her a story, tucked her in, and waited until she fell asleep before leaving the room. Only then did he sit in the living room, exhausted but content. Reflecting on the day, the memory of the woman from the shop lingered in his mind. He couldn't understand why some people judged so quickly, why they looked at someone and assumed they knew their story. He had learned not to take it personally. Most people were blinded by appearances and never took the time to look deeper. But still, part of him wondered if she would ever understand, if anyone would. Later that evening, he pulled out a small box from the top shelf of the closet. Inside were letters and photos from a life he rarely spoke about. The tattoo she had glimpsed earlier was a small reminder of this past a time of discipline, danger, and sacrifice. He had chosen not to wear it openly, not because he was ashamed, but because it was not something to display for judgment or approval. It was a private part of him, a piece of his story that shaped who he was today. He sat quietly for a moment, tracing the edges of the photographs. Faces of people he had served with, memories of missions, moments of triumph and sorrow. He had left that life behind to protect something far more important, his daughter's future. Each day was a choice, a small battle to provide her with love, guidance, and stability. The next morning, Evan returned to the shop. The routine was the same: sweeping floors, organizing tools, greeting customers. But today he was aware of the woman's visit more than usual. He thought about the subtle curiosity in her eyes, the way she had noticed his tattoo without understanding it. Maybe one day, he thought, people would see more than what was on the surface. Until then, he would continue his quiet life, working with skill, raising his daughter with care, letting actions speak louder than appearances. Throughout the day, different customers came and went. Each one brought a small challenge, a problem to solve, a conversation that passed like ripples across the shop. Evan handled each with the same calm precision, listening, assessing, and fixing. The work was never glamorous, but it was honest, and it gave him pride that no flashy suit or impressive title ever could. By late afternoon, the sun cast long shadows again, and he prepared to pick up his daughter. The walk back to school was filled with her stories, her laughter ringing in the air. People passed them, some giving polite nods, others lost in their own worlds. Evan didn't notice them. His focus was on her, on making sure she felt safe, loved, and supported. As they reached home, she tugged at his hand. "Dad, can we read the story about the night tonight?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. "Of course," he said, smiling. It was a simple joy, a small ritual that anchored their evenings. He knew that these moments, though ordinary, were building the foundation of her understanding of love, trust, and care. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, Evan sat in the living room, exhausted but at peace. He reflected on his life, the struggles, the small victories, and the quiet moments of connection. The world outside often judged him unfairly, but inside this little apartment, with his daughter sleeping peacefully, he knew who he truly was. He was not defined by his clothes, his job, or the opinions of strangers. He was defined by his choices, his actions, and the love he gave without expecting anything in return. The next day, when he returned to the shop, he knew the routine would continue. Cars would arrive with problems, people would enter with judgments. Life would move forward in its ordinary, unremarkable way. But Evan carried something rare, a quiet strength, a deep sense of purpose, and the knowledge that he was raising his daughter to understand the true meaning of character, courage, and love. And in the end, he knew. That was more valuable than any recognition from the world outside. The next morning, Ivan opened the shop with his usual routine. He liked the quiet of the early hours. The way the sunlight spilled through the windows, catching on dust particles that danced in the air. It was his time to focus, to prepare for the day before customers began arriving with their cars and their expectations. The hum of the street outside was soft and distant, and for a moment, it felt like the world was just him, his tools, and the cars waiting for his attention. He began working on a small sedan that had been making a strange rattling noise. As he leaned under the hood, twisting wrenches and checking the engine, his mind wandered briefly to the woman from the other day. She had returned a few times in his thoughts, not in annoyance, but because there had been something in her eyes that he couldn't forget. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a kind of judgment he was used to, one he carried with patience. People often saw only what they wanted to see, and appearances always spoke louder than truth. The tattoo on his arm itched slightly as he stretched to reach a part of the engine. It was hidden beneath his shirt, the meaning known only to him, a reminder of a life that had demanded everything he could give. He had chosen not to speak about it, not because it was shameful, but because it belonged to a part of himself that was private. He didn't need recognition or validation. He only needed to know that he was living his life the way he wanted and protecting the future of his daughter. Around mid-morning, the shop door opened again with a familiar jingle. It wasn't the woman, but another customer, an older man bringing in a pickup truck. Evan greeted him politely, listening as the man explained the problem. He moved with ease, his hands working quickly and confidently, every turn of a wrench deliberate and precise. The older man watched him with growing admiration, nodding occasionally and muttering under his breath about how skilled he was. Evan didn't react to the praise. He had learned to let his work speak for itself. By late morning, the woman from the other day walked in again. This time she seemed slightly more hesitant. She wore the same well-pressed suit and carried the same air of confidence, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She paused at the door, looking around at the cluttered shop, and then her gaze fell on Evan. He looked up and gave a small nod. "Good morning," he said simply. "Good morning," she replied, her voice softer than before. She moved closer to the counter, careful not to touch anything, as if she was stepping into an unfamiliar world. I wanted to ask about my car again. There's been a slight noise and I thought maybe." She paused, realizing she wasn't sure how to continue. "Sure, I can take a look," Evan said. He gestured toward the garage. "Let's see what's going on." As they walked toward the car, she tried to make conversation, her tone tentative. You've been a mechanic for a long time, haven't you?" "Yes," he replied. "Long enough to know how engines should sound?" There was a silence, a pause that felt awkward. She glanced at him, and for the first time, she noticed the tattoo peeking from under his sleeve as he reached into the engine bay. This time, she didn't look away immediately. Her curiosity got the better of her. The inked lines were intricate, detailed, and she could make out some symbols, though their meaning was unclear. She swallowed hard, trying to hide the sudden interest that flickered in her eyes. Evan worked quietly, twisting a wrench, checking bolts, listening to the engine. He moved with practiced ease, and every motion seemed deliberate and exact. The woman watched, her initial judgment softening as she realized that his appearance didn't define his skill. She tried to imagine the life it must take to be so precise, so calm under pressure. She had assumed so much about him in just a few moments, and now those assumptions were beginning to crumble. While he worked, Evan thought about his past, about why the tattoo was there. It wasn't for show, and it wasn't for recognition. It was a story, a collection of memories and experiences that had shaped him into the man he was. Each symbol, each mark, represented discipline, loss, and moments of courage that had left him forever changed. He rarely spoke of it, even to his daughter. She didn't need the weight of that past. She only needed the man who would guide her, protect her, love her unconditionally. As he finished checking the engine, he straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. "I think I've found the cause of the noise," he said. "It's minor, shouldn't take long to fix." The woman nodded, still studying him. I didn't realize," she began, then stopped. She didn't know what to say. Words felt inadequate to express the sudden respect and curiosity that had replaced her initial judgment. Evan smiled faintly, sensing her shift. "It's okay," he said gently. "Most people don't see beyond what's on the surface. That's normal." She nodded again, unsure of how to respond. They worked together in a quiet rhythm, her watching, him focusing on the car. The shop was filled with the scent of oil and metal, the faint hum of machines, and a strange sort of peace. For her, it was unsettling and fascinating at the same time. She realized that there was a depth to him she had never imagined, a life that had required courage and resilience that couldn't be measured by clothes or appearance. After a while, Evan finished the repair. "All set," he said simply. "Shouldn't hear the noise again." She got up, inspecting the car. The engine ran smoothly, purring like it had been reborn. She couldn't hide the impressed look on her face. "Thank you," she said softly. I really appreciate it," Evan nodded, giving a small smile. "Glad I could help." As she prepared to leave, she glanced at his arm again, the tattoo fully visible now as he reached to open the shop door. Her curiosity burned stronger, though she didn't know what it meant. She wanted to ask, to understand, but something inside her told her that it wasn't her story to know just yet. She left quietly, but the image of the tattoo stayed with her, a symbol of a life she had only begun to imagine. Evan watched her go, and turned back to his workbench, wiping down tools and organizing parts. The quiet of the shop embraced him once more. His thoughts drifted to his daughter, wondering how she was spending her day. He hoped she was laughing, learning, growing, finding the small joys in life that made each day meaningful. Later that evening, at home, he thought more about the tattoo and the memories it held. He pulled out the small box with photos and letters, tracing the edges of faces from a past life. The experiences had been intense, sometimes frightening, sometimes exhilarating. But they had shaped him into someone who valued patience, precision, and love above all else. He had chosen a quiet life not because he lacked ambition, but because he knew what was truly important. His daughter came running to him as soon as he entered the apartment, and all thoughts of the past faded into the background. They laughed together, shared stories about their day, and continued their bedtime routine. As he tucked her in, he felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that no matter what people thought about him outside, inside this little world, he was exactly the father he needed to be. The next day, Evan returned to the shop with renewed focus. He knew the woman might return, and he knew that if she did, she would see more of him than she ever had. But he was at peace. His life was not for judgment. It was for living, for teaching his daughter through his actions, and for continuing to move forward quietly, skillfully, and with unwavering care. Throughout the day, the shop buzzed with activity. Cars came in with problems, customers with questions and doubts, but Evan handled each with the same calm expertise. He noticed small things that others overlooked, adjusted parts with care, and spoke with a quiet authority that inspired trust. By the time the day ended, he was exhausted but fulfilled. The routine, the work, and the quiet moments with his daughter made life rich, meaningful, and real. That night, as he sat in the living room, he reflected on the woman, the tattoo, and the subtle lessons she had learned without realizing it. People often judged quickly, but actions, patience, and quiet strength revealed the truth in ways words never could. Evan understood this more than anyone, and he knew that one day, perhaps the world would see him for who he truly was. But until then, he would continue to live with integrity, love his daughter fully, and let the quiet power of his life speak for itself. The next morning, Evan arrived at the shop earlier than usual. The sun had just started to rise, casting a soft golden light through the dusty windows. He enjoyed these quiet moments before the rush, when the world felt calm and he could prepare his mind for the day ahead. He checked his tools, arranged the wrenches and sockets, and made sure every corner of the shop was tidy. Even small order brought him a sense of peace. As he wiped down a workbench, the shop door jingled. He looked up and saw the woman from before standing there again. She hesitated slightly, as though unsure whether to enter. Evan nodded, and she stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the concrete floor. There was a different look in her eyes today, less judgmental, more curious, and maybe a little cautious. "Good morning," Evan said, his voice calm. "Good morning," she replied, her voice softer than the first time. She glanced around the shop, then at him, and for the first time, she seemed to study him without the immediate judgments she had worn before. I came because I wanted to understand," she started, then paused, unsure how to continue. Evan raised an eyebrow slightly. "Understand what?" She hesitated, then pointed to the edge of his rolled-up sleeve, where the tattoo was just barely visible. "Your tattoo. I can't stop wondering about it, it seems." "Important." Evan looked down at it, a small smile forming on his lips. He took a deep breath and sat on a stool nearby. "It is important," he said, "but it's not something I share often. It's part of a life I left behind." Her curiosity grew, but she remained quiet, sensing that whatever he was about to share would not be light or easy. She sat on the chair across from him, waiting, listening. Evan took a moment before speaking. "I wasn't always a mechanic. I had a different life before this, one that required discipline, risk, and sacrifice. The tattoo? It reminds me of that life, the people I lost, the missions I completed, and the lessons I learned. I carry it with me not to show off, but to remember who I am and the responsibility I carry." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes wide. She could feel the weight of his words, the depth of experience behind them. You served. In what way?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "I was in the military. Special operations. There are things I can't talk about, things too heavy for most people to understand. But every mark on this tattoo represents a person, a moment, a life that shaped me." She nodded slowly, absorbing the meaning. Her mind was racing with questions, but she could see that some things were sacred, meant to be kept private. She realized how little she knew about people, how easy it was to judge without understanding. She felt a quiet shame for her first impressions. For the assumptions she had made based on his clothes in the small repair shop, Evan continued. More to himself than to her, explaining the philosophy he had learned from that life. Discipline, patience, and the importance of protecting what matters most. "I chose this life," he said, gesturing around the modest shop, "because it allows me to be the father I want to be. My daughter, she's my purpose. Everything else, every risk, every choice I made before, led me here. And now, this," he motioned to the shop and his simple life, "is exactly where I need to be." The woman listened, her respect for him growing with every word. She could see the strength in his quiet demeanor, the resilience in the way he spoke, and the deep love he had for his daughter. She realized that the world outside, with its judgments and appearances, meant nothing compared to the life he had built, the love he gave, and the integrity he lived by, as the morning turned to afternoon. He invited her to watch him work on a small car problem. She hesitated, then agreed, curious to see the skill and precision he applied to every task. She noticed the care in his movements, the way he anticipated problems, and the focus in his eyes. It was clear that his expertise was not just in fixing engines, but in discipline, patience, and understanding. Each action carried purpose. At one point, he leaned back to adjust a component, and the sleeve of his shirt rolled up fully, revealing the entire tattoo. She studied it closely now, seeing the symbols, the dates, and the small names etched in ink. Each detail spoke of sacrifice, loyalty, and loss. She understood now that it was not decoration, but a story written on his skin. a history he carried silently with him. "Why don't you ever talk about it?" she asked quietly. "Because most people can't understand," he said softly. "And because the past doesn't define the present, what matters now is what I do, how I live, and how I raise my daughter. She doesn't need to carry the weight of my history. She needs stability, love, and the example of someone who does the right thing, quietly and without fanfare." Her heart ached slightly with understanding and admiration. She had judged him for appearances, for the shop, for his clothing, and now she realized how wrong she had been. His strength was quiet, not showy. His character was deep, not shallow. His life, though different from hers, held lessons far beyond anything she had imagined. The hours passed as she watched him work, listening to his stories about discipline, courage, and responsibility. Though he did not share everything, the glimpses he offered were enough to paint a picture of a man who had faced challenges beyond most people's understanding and had emerged with humility and focus. By evening, the woman felt a mixture of emotions: awe, respect, and a quiet shame for her initial judgments. She had entered the shop thinking she knew everything she needed to know about him. Now she realized she had understood almost nothing. She wanted to apologize, to express her newfound respect, but she sensed that words were not enough. Evan finally leaned back, wiping his hands and looking toward the door where the sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the shop. "It's been a long day," he said quietly. She nodded, standing up. "Thank you," she said sincerely, her voice filled with respect. "For everything. For sharing this, and for letting me see." Evan gave a small smile. "You don't need to understand everything," he said gently. "Just remember that what you see isn't always what is. Actions, care, and integrity matter far more than appearances." She left the shop quietly, feeling changed. For the first time, she truly understood that life was more than what met the eye, that some people carried worlds of experience and strength beneath simple surfaces. Evan watched her go, thinking of his daughter, the life he was protecting, and the quiet power of living honestly and with purpose. Later that night, at home, he reflected on the day while sitting in the living room. His daughter slept soundly, her small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of innocence and trust. Evan felt a deep satisfaction. The world outside might judge and misunderstand, but inside this home, in these small, quiet moments, life was real, meaningful, and full of love. And that, he knew, was everything that truly mattered. The following morning, Evan opened the shop as usual, the familiar smell of oil and metal greeting him. The sun shone through the windows, illuminating the small tools arranged neatly on the shelves. The quiet moments before the first customer arrived always felt like a fresh start, a chance to focus on the work and prepare for whatever the day would bring. He wiped down the counter, checked the inventory, and straightened the benches. Every small action brought him a sense of calm and purpose. By mid-morning, the familiar jingle of the door announced a visitor. Evan looked up to see the woman standing there again. Her posture was slightly less rigid than before, her expression softer. She stepped inside, glancing around the shop, then at him. Evan gave a polite nod, motioning toward the garage.
"Good morning," he said. "Good morning,"
she replied, her voice warmer than the first time she had entered. She paused, then said, "I wanted to apologize for judging you before. I realize now I didn't see who you really are." Evan smiled faintly, a gentle acknowledgement. "It's okay. People often judge quickly. It's natural. What matters is what we do, not what others assume." She nodded, her gaze falling to his tattoo again, which was partially visible as he rolled up his sleeves to work on a car. Today, however, there was no curiosity without respect. She understood that the marks on his arm were more than ink. They were memories, sacrifices, and lessons that had shaped him into the man he was. It was a quiet strength that didn't need words to prove itself. "I wanted to see more of your work," she said softly. "I think I underestimated how skilled you are." Evan nodded and gestured toward a small sedan in the garage. "Let's take a look at this one. It's been making a slight noise." As they worked together, she noticed the precision in his movements, the way he listened to the engine, the careful adjustments he made. Every action was deliberate, measured, and confident. It was clear that his skill was not just in fixing machines, but in understanding, anticipating, and solving problems. The respect in her eyes grew with each passing moment. While he worked, he spoke quietly about discipline, patience, and dedication without revealing more than necessary. She listened attentively, absorbing the lessons embedded in his words. She realized that these qualities were not just professional, they were personal, shaping the way he lived his life and cared for his daughter at one point. He straightened up and removed his gloves, his sleeves rolled up fully. The tattoo was visible in its entirety now, a story etched in ink. She studied it closely, seeing the symbols, names, and dates, understanding that each mark represented sacrifice, courage, and loss. The realization filled her with awe, and she understood why he had never spoken much about it. Some experiences were too heavy for casual conversation, too profound to be shared lightly. "Thank you for letting me see this," she said quietly. I can't imagine what it must have been like." Evan nodded. "It was a life full of challenges and lessons, but it's behind me now. What matters most is what I do today, how I raise my daughter, and how I live each day with integrity." She felt a deep respect for him, not just for his past, but for the way he had built a life grounded in love, care, and responsibility. She realized that appearances, clothing, and status meant very little compared to actions, choices, and character. As the day passed, they worked quietly, occasionally exchanging a few words. The atmosphere was calm, filled with focus and mutual understanding. When the repair was finished, Evan stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. All done. The noise shouldn't come back. She inspected the car and nodded, impressed by his expertise. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "For your work and for letting me understand a part of your life I would have never guessed." Evan gave a small smile. "Glad I could help. Just remember, everyone has a story. We often see only the surface." She left the shop with a new perspective, carrying with her a quiet admiration and a lesson she would not forget. She understood now that life was far richer and more complex than first impressions suggested. People like Evan, who lived quietly with strength, integrity, and love, were rare and remarkable. Later that evening, Evan returned home to his daughter. She ran into his arms as soon as he walked in, her laughter filling the apartment. They shared stories about their day, cooked a simple dinner together, and went through their bedtime routine. He read her favorite story, tucked her in, and watched her drift off to sleep, her small chest rising and falling steadily. Sitting in the living room afterward, Evan reflected on the day. The world outside often judged quickly, but within his home, in the quiet moments with his daughter, life was real, meaningful, and full of love. The tattoo on his arm, the past it represented, and the skills he had gained were all tools that allowed him to live fully and provide the best for her. In the following days, the woman returned occasionally, not just for car repairs, but to apologize again and observe quietly. She never asked intrusive questions, respecting the boundaries he had set, but she carried a new awareness of the depth behind appearances. She began to see the lessons in patience, skill, and quiet courage that Evan embodied in every action. Evan continued his daily routine, picking up his daughter, helping with homework, cooking meals, and repairing cars. The rhythm of life, simple yet meaningful, carried on. Every interaction with customers, every small task, and every shared moment with his daughter reinforced the quiet power of integrity and care. The tattoo remained a silent testament to a past life, a reminder of resilience, discipline, and sacrifice. He rarely spoke of it, but it shaped who he was and how he lived. His daughter, growing up with his example, learned the importance of love, responsibility, and strength without the need for words. And the woman, who had once judged him, learned a lesson she would carry forever, that character, dedication, and heart matter far more than appearances. By the end of each day, Evan felt a quiet satisfaction. He had built a life grounded in meaning, love, and integrity. He understood the world outside might never fully see or understand him, but within his home, with his daughter, and in the work he did every day, he had found something far more valuable than recognition. He had found purpose, connection, and a life lived honestly. The story of the tattoo, the lessons, and the small shop became a memory for the woman as well. She carried with her the understanding that strength often comes quietly. Love is demonstrated through actions, and the most remarkable people might live ordinary lives on the surface, hiding extraordinary courage and heart beneath. Evan, meanwhile, continued to live each day fully, raising his daughter with unwavering care, fixing cars with precision, and carrying the memories and lessons of his past silently, letting them guide him. The world outside would judge, assume, and misunderstand. But he had learned long ago that life's true value lies in the quiet strength to do right, love fully, and protect what truly matters.